I want to talk to you about something which has fascinated me for the last 12 years about Final Fantasy XIII. Someone on the art team had an armpit fetish. None of the women wear sleeves, like ever. There's a hard refusal to cover up the pits, and the pits are, just always in frame. What's up with that? Why did they do that? Super weird. Anyway, Final Fantasy XIII is a divisive entry in the series nowadays. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of its insistence on automating a large part of turn-based RPG strategizing by encouraging style switching and hitting the auto button with mechanics built around having characters in a turn-based game attack very quickly in succession in order to properly dispatch enemies who attack at a rapid pace in order to pressure you into adhering to the same playstyle as everyone else. That being said, I've played Final Fantasy XIII a good amount more than other Final Fantasy games in a fruitless attempt to understand what others enjoy about it. While I don't think I'll ever take to its gameplay elements, I also won't take to its narrative ones either. 13's story feels very aimless and disjointed. Decent character moments are constantly overshadowed by an ambiguous central plot and a boring premise we've seen in plenty of RPGs. Fighting Destiny is so basic and routine and can be built into better themes in this genre. Previous Final Fantasies accomplished as much and more, but I didn't completely come away from 13 without enjoyment. Among the cast of redundant heroes and chopped up references and recycling of previous characters in Final Fantasy, one has stood out to me every time I pick 13 back up to give it another chance. He's a character many of you might be fond of, and he's a character I find a lot more grounded, believable, and compelling to watch. Despite the messy plot we watch him wander around in, his arc tells a great story, and between you and me, he would have made for a better protagonist. I'm GC Vazquez, and this is the Ballad of Sazh Katzroy. You should know, Sazh isn't a perfect character, and very few characters we'll cover in this series are. Regardless of how I feel about his personal journey, there's at least one issue with his design based on problematic assumptions about afro-textured hair. During the events of Final Fantasy XIII, Sazh befriends a baby chocobo who nests inside his afro. It's a common stereotype when a black character has big hair to incorporate some kind of animal living inside it or get across the idea the hair is unkempt or dirty. Final Fantasy XIII also aggressively associates Sazh with jazz and the blues. Most of the tracks relating to Sazh are either one of these two genres of music. They aren't just outliers in Final Fantasy music in general, they are especially outliers in Final Fantasy XIII's own soundtrack. Jazz is undeniably black culture, but it's sort of like playing salsa every time the Hispanic guy is on screen. It stands out as a conscious decision to separate Sazh from his fellow party members, and although this is something you should do with party members of an RPG, it errs on the side of tokenism. And as is the case with a lot of black characters in video games, Sazh is absolutely a comic relief character who thankfully breaks off from just being one in a satisfying way, but is still front-loaded to be the singular comedy component. I don't claim to be an expert on this stuff, it's admittedly out of my wheelhouse, even though I'm always trying my best to learn more about it. I've seen complaints about these parts of his character design before and felt like I should open with it. It's good to be aware of the flaws in parts of media you like. Introduced as a deuteragonist, Sazh Katzroy is with us from the beginning, albeit thrown around for comedy by the action unfolding. In between slapstick humor routines, we do get a small glimpse of a few of his defining traits: a very intense desire to survive, and a less intense but still very powerful sense of compassion. Our first look at him is a shot of Sazh kneeling in front of a young boy, assuring him everything is going to be alright, followed up by his exclamation about the prisoners wanting to help fight back against Cocoon's military police. During this opening segment, his constant complaining about Lightning's insistence to leave the other prisoners behind and march into dangerous territory is juxtaposed to his inability to abandon her to her self-imposed suicide mission. Sazh can't help himself. Something compels him to keep going. He's meant to balance out Lightning's abrasive demeanor and create obvious callbacks to Final Fantasy VII.
Aren't you supposed to protect civilians, soldier?
I was a soldier.
The opening cutscenes and cinematics of Final Fantasy XIII establish an important truth. Sazh Katzroy cares, and he really wishes he didn't. He's also ACAB as hell.
PsyCom, Guardian Corps. Soldiers are soldiers, aren't they? Tell a soldier to kill an enemy, and you really think it's gonna matter what uniform he's wearing? How about you? Orders say shoot, you pull the trigger?
The events of Final Fantasy XIII are a bit vague due to how it employs en media res, but the general idea is clear enough. A rebellion is in progress on Cocoon, a sort of continent? Our future party members are all in the middle of it in some way, for some reason, to be later discovered as the splintered group clashes and reacts to each other's revelations. Eventually, they all head towards the Pulse Vestige and the Pulse Fal'Cie inhabiting it. By the end of the prologue, regardless of their reasons for being there, the group fails in their respective goals, and to make matters more complicated, they're all branded by the Pulse Fal'Cie. In 13, when you're branded by a Fal'Cie, you're forced to do its cryptic bidding with only a vague vision of what exactly the Fal'Cie desires to guide you. Doing what the Fal'Cie wants is called your focus, and completing your focus turns you into Crystal. Not doing what the Fal'Cie wants will slowly grow your brand until you are eventually turned into a monster. Kinda like YouTube. Branded humans are called l'Cie, and monsters who failed to achieve their focus are called Seath. The terminology of Final Fantasy XIII is bizarrely homogenous if it's not explained well, and it's not. But hang on to this chunk of information, it'll be important soon. Saz's personality emerges through conversations with the party and is often the voice of reason. He keeps Snow and Lightning's hotter tempers in check and quickly assumes a paternal role in the group. He's quick to shut down hasty conclusions, he can pinpoint what others are feeling in a given situation, and he's noticeably gentler with the younger party members. Saz's compassion is obvious, his wisdom is magnetic. In most characters, this would give way to a bold, unwavering personality. Given his reasoning skills and sharp mind, Sazh would also be the confident older hero type, like one of the many Cids in Final Fantasy, or maybe Geralt from the Witcher series, just way more outspoken. But unlike many characters in Final Fantasy XIII, an internal dilemma causes Sazh to be at odds with himself. Instead of the unwavering hero, he's a defeatist, apathetic about completing his focus and or taking the fight back to the Fal'Cie in order to change his fate. At the same time, his survival instincts spur him forward during their escape from Cocoon's soldiers, now searching for the renegade l'Cie with orders to capture them. He's more secretive than the rest of the party. After most of their motivations are revealed, Sazh keeps his close to the chest and dodges any questions about his past. You have a man unable to stop himself from helping others and feeling responsible for anyone younger than him, yet you also have a man afraid to fight back against the cards he's been dealt with and can't rationalize risking his life in order to save it. The only thing Sazh Katzroy can do, the only thing which makes sense to him at this moment, is to run from his death, from his salvation, from having to make a tough decision. His flight response causes a divide between the group, with Lightning and Hope heading towards Eden, where the Sanctum Fal'Cie resides, and Vanille staying behind to keep Sazh company. The two agree to journey to Nautilus in the opposite direction of Eden. On their journey, we learn a bit more about Sazh and his hesitation to fight the Fal'Cie. He has a son, a Sanctum l'Cie, chosen by a Fal'Cie to protect it from Pulse l'Cie invaders who sought to destroy it. Even though once those invaders escape, his son should have turned to Crystal immediately, because he would have completed his focus. It makes no sense why his son isn't an ice cube yet, according to the established rules of this world. I digress. At the beginning of their walk to Nautilus, Sazh comes off as somewhat of a coward. Even though he knows he should do something, he's not confident it would help. When we learn his son Dodge is under custody of the Sanctum's elite forces, being tested and used as a tool to search for l'Cie, we realize Saz's escape isn't entirely about getting away, he's trying to buy time for Dodge. The longer he can stay away, the longer Dodge goes without completing his focus, the longer Dodge gets to live. But at the same time, all l'Cie without a completed focus becomes Seath. Eventually, Saz's gambit won't be enough. Knowing if he took the fight to the fal'Cie, Sanctum forces would no doubt use Dodge to find them, Sazh refuses to fall for the bait, even though every part of him is screaming to go rescue his son. This recontextualization of Saz's behavior paints a grim picture of a man being swallowed up by his fears and inability to do anything about them. Sazh feels guilty for his son's condition, is frustrated by his lack of power, and stumbles into a depression. His energy dwindles the further he runs. He contemplates revenge against the Pulse l'Cie who indirectly cursed Dodge. He has suicide ideation about preventing Dodge from becoming Seath. He harbors resentment towards the Pulse l'Cie and Pulse in general. Ironic, considering he's been bonding with the very same Pulse l'Cie who caused his son to become a l'Cie. By the way, what's up with making the ACAB black guy have a casual racist arc? I mean, you've got a little pasty kid nobody likes running around without any real-world life experience right there. Anyway, upon arriving at Nautilus, Sazh is noticeably more reserved. He's tired and upset. And we, the player, have watched him spiral deeper into a hole he can't crawl out of on his own. Lost in a city of spectacles and dreams, he keeps up some amount of energy to ease Vanille's worries. As it goes with stories like Saz's, however, eventually the problems you're escaping from will catch up to you.
Daddy, I found you!
Huh? But how did you get here? Dodge! Wait! The bag!
As his son turns to crystal, the futility of Saz's efforts come down on him. Sazh Katzroy has failed. Unable to save his son, he's lost any reason to continue running. All he has left is his resentment for a stranger he's never met, and enough grief to muddle his mind until he exacts his revenge. And lucky for him, she's standing right over there. This is Sazh Katzroy's moment of truth.
Vanille.
As participants in his story, we've seen all sides of him. The caring, compassionate father figure, the tired, confused, and bitter man. We've watched him wrestle with his feelings about his circumstances and also look out for those walking beside him.
You think you die, and that's that? You think you die and everything will be sugar and rainbows?
Orerba de Vanille has been the subject of both his kindness and his anger. The reveal of who she is makes those feelings collide and begin a battle of supremacy. Faced with two versions of Vanille, the plucky girl who encouraged him and insisted he keep it together for Dodge, and his invented image of the Pulse l'Cie he was ready to murder if it meant saving Dodge from becoming Seath, Sazh is finally forced to accept the truth. He can't change what has already happened.
Shooting you won't help. Neither will living.
His resignation summons forth an Adolin, the summons in Final Fantasy XIII, which only appear to l'Cie who've been bonded to their focus against their will, and so strongly reject it they lose all hope. And I kid you not, they show up to these l'Cie to offer them a mercy killing. Sazh accepts his fate and prepares to let the Adolin finish him off. But remember, Sazh Katzroy cares.
Okay, fine. You want me? Come and get me!
After fighting his Adolin and being rewarded with the pussy wagon, Sazh recollects himself, takes aim at Vanille, and lays to rest his thoughts of revenge.
A lot of things can be excused. Shooting kids ain't one.
And surprisingly for Final Fantasy, acquiring new power doesn't magically grant Sazh strength to carry on. He still wallows in the hopelessness of the situation and attempts to take his own life.
Enough. Is enough.
Frankly, this scene is a little redundant. Saz's Adolin fight against Brynhilde is already a representation of his will to live. He's a protector at heart, and so long as there is someone to save, Sazh Katzroy will put his life on the line to save them. Brynhilde is based on the Valkyrie of the same name, figures in Norse mythology who choose who lives and dies on the battlefield. The power of the Valkyries is not unlike the powers of the Fal'Cie, who fatally enthrall humans to an inescapable fate. When Vanille steps in front of Sazh to sacrifice herself for him, Sazh sees the parallels between her and his son. They are children forced into servitude, who've lost their lives to forces beyond their control. By fighting Brynhilde, Sazh turns his feelings towards the Fal'Cie, and after acquiring her power, once again raises his gun at Vanille. Despite his turmoil, he knows one thing well enough. No one should be able to choose who dies. Holding the power of the Valkyries in his hands, Sazh assumes the responsibility of using it to protect others. In the end, Sazh Katzroy chooses kindness, and with time to reflect on his journey with Vanille, begins to find hope in her story.
Now. I've been thinking. You woke up from being a crystal once. Well, that means Dodge will wake up one day too, right?
Sazh Katzroy cares. And he's also still ACAB as hell.
When your peace come, you too.
The Ballad of Sazh Katzroy is more than a tragedy about a father who loses his son. It's about feeling powerless to change someone else's fate as you watch them inch closer and closer to the end. It's about the sadness of waiting for it to come and how the grief can warp your thoughts into awful conclusions. It captures the way depression can take hold of someone and drown them in a motionless sea. How it leads you to a dark conclusion and makes it difficult to see any other options. But it's also about how underneath the pain, you're still the same person you used to be. Deep beneath the stillness of the water, there's someone fighting to reach the surface. Every so often, finding a pocket of fresh air to breathe. And it's in those moments we remember what the people we lose would have wanted for us. Saz's story is one of survival, reminding us there's always another day to keep on fighting, and no matter how cynical we may be, more than enough hope is left in the world to keep our heads up. It isn't always sugar and rainbows, but it's worth seeing through to tomorrow.
Scares me so much. I think I might die of fright. So, I push myself to live even harder. I can just imagine Dodge laughing at me talking this nonsense. I'd do anything to see that smile. Stay positive, right?
And to me, it's the reason why Sazh Katzroy would have been a better main protagonist than Lightning. Sazh has a unique motivation in the narrative, and his relationship with a victim to the whole Fal'Cie situation isn't shared by other characters. This isn't inherently necessary for a central protagonist, but helps distinguish them from the rest of the cast, especially if the way those characters are associated with one another is still important. Saz's connection to Vanille is much stronger than the rest of the cast, and because Vanille is the impetus of everyone else's tragic circumstances, the greater amounts of screen time she gets as a result of pairing up with Sazh in the early game would have helped give her more presence in the story. Sazh is already a paternal figure who exhibits paternal tendencies to the rest of the party and would more organically serve those roles, as opposed to Lightning or Snow, who for some reason are pushed into parental relationships with younger characters, which ends up taking time away from exploring their own character arcs. And most importantly, 13's themes would have been better represented by Sazh Katzroy. It opens with a clear example of a class divide, and Cocoon's prejudice against the people of Pulse is often mentioned. Moreover, these divisions are eventually revealed to be falsehoods perpetuated by the fal'Cie to deflect blame and resistance against their rule, in order to keep the humans infighting and oblivious to the true oppressors. Unlike the rest of 13's cast, Sazh is the only person who fits snugly into these established themes in powerful ways. Neither a soldier or a naive would-be hero, Sazh is an everyman just trying to be a good father. And suddenly, he and his son are put under the custody of a state police because the rulers of their world deemed it so. Caught as a pawn in a power dynamic, he tries to free his son from their mutual fate. With Sazh as the central lead, Snow and Lightning would play smaller roles representing both sides of the man. The energetic, eager guardian looking to make things right, and the cynical soldier driven by anger, both motivated by a mutual loss. Hope would be the surrogate son, someone for Sazh to project his feelings onto and provide solid moments to reflect on Dodge with. Vanille and Fang would at first represent his fears and be the targets of his ire, but in the way 13 already develops those two, would give way to Sazh reassessing who he should be taking the fight to, because in them, he'd see himself, people swept up in someone else's game of chess, feeling just as guilty and powerless to change fate as he is. The cast synergizes better with Sazh at the center of the plot, and the ideas discussed in 13 are more effectively told by devoting more time to his character arc. And maybe I'm pandering a little bit here, but featuring a black man as the protagonist of a story about how classism and racism are actually one and the same, which addresses the way people in power have orchestrated the oppression of everyone beneath their station, is probably way more powerful of a message than center staging someone's unhealthy obsession with pink hair and armpits. Especially when 13 is a rare moment of a game making a commentary on those themes, even if it does it through forced poeticism in dialogue and drops it altogether once it reaches the fight God part of every Final Fantasy story, where a character representing marginalized people isn't put through excessively greater traumas than everyone else. But as is, Sazh Katzroy gets forgotten underneath the mountain of multimedia content focused on other characters from the same trilogy. Even worse, his presence in the world of Final Fantasy XIII is reduced in scale with each entry, as it continues to deviate and separate itself from the themes discussed in the original. But I like to think it was something Square Enix considered for a brief moment. After all, Sazh has the most dialogue out of any other character in Final Fantasy XIII, and still has a large portion of 13 dedicated to his story. Out of any of these characters, we come to understand Sazh the best. I like to think he could headline his own Final Fantasy, but we probably won't ever see it happen. Until then, I'm happy to shine a spotlight on a character who means more to me than the vehicle he's been placed in. Because Sazh Katzroy cares, and so do I.